So today I'm going to be talking to Shivam O'Brien. Hi, Shiv.
Hello.
I can see the thing swinging above your head there.
Good morning. The cauldron is swinging, yeah.
That's good. So you're looking well, actually.
Thank you.
So look, my traditional first question is, what do you do?
There's a New York workshop promoter came to me once after I was on stage. I was on with this band, and I was just, if you like, just rapping away, doing this ancient Celtic, Irish kind of invoking while the guys were playing music. And he came to me afterwards when I got off stage, and he said, "Wow, man, I want to be your promoter. It's just amazing what I just saw there. I want to just promote you, man. I just love what you do. What do you do?" And
yeah,
well, that's America. Okay, so I put together about 5 things that I really love when I was a kid with a dream, to use Leonard Cohen's word.
Yeah.
When I was in my 30s, and just decided, right, I don't want to be in town. I don't want a regular job. I never did anyway. I was pretty clear about that when I was 12. But when I was, in my sort of about 32, it came to me like, okay, I want to be out in the wild woods somewhere. I want to see the forest. I want to see the smoke rising. There's going to be people cooking on an open fire, or at least me cooking on an open fire. I used to do a lot of that anyway. And somehow there's a teepee or something like that in the background. And there's a place for meditation, and there's also nights of music and dance. The stars are in there somewhere or other. And it was like, I want serious self-inquiry, serious kind of meditation going on, beautiful music, wild nature, the soft earth underneath me, and there's got to be the smell of wood smoke in the air there somewhere. And that's got to be the soundtrack and the backdrop. And somebody asked me, a kind of big moment really occurred. I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's kind of, well, do you enjoy your carpentry and all this? Now, I do love carpentry, but at the time I was building cupboards for people in London. And I said, no, it's just, I just want to get away to the country for the weekend, or go off and do the next workshop, or meet the next shaman. Or I was experimenting a lot in those days, late 20s. And I said, no, this is just shit. I just do this stuff so that I can go and do what I really want to do. And he said, well, what do you really want to do? So I said all that. I said, that's what I really want to do. Be in the forest, maybe running a sweat lodge, or, maybe some people are coming for a Buddhist weekend or something like that. And he said, why don't you do that stuff then? And so I made a decision about a week later. His question sort of found the arrow made a wound somewhere. And that festered a little bit. And I thought, right, I'm going to change my life. I'm only going to touch the things that I really love. And it became like that. It's going to be the music, wild nature, retreat, kind of fairly serious approach to spirituality. I'm not some new age dreaming. And I put those things together, and they became a thing called Spirit Horse. So I needed a place for all this to happen. I experimented a little bit. There was a beautiful little forest in Devon. There was somewhere else. And then a valley appeared. Everything happened in the space of 6 months. A very wild, beautiful valley that you couldn't drive a tractor or a car down after a certain point, and you had to walk across rivers. And some farmers suggested that it was okay for us to hire that for a month or two to do things every summer. Well, actually, it was a week or two to start with, but it quickly became a month or two. And then from that little seed of dissatisfaction, of unrest, was born a kind of possibility. And I followed through with it. Like, I stopped doing everything else. And from that moment on, from that conversation, I never again worked for anybody in any way, doing a kind of anything vaguely you might call the day job. That was over. And instead, the garden where I was living in London became a teepee making workshop. and then everyone I knew was either in or out. This is the next adventure. We're going off to this wild valley in Wales. We're going to set up our wild kitchen there. We're going to invite some teachers to come. Some of them might come, some of them not. We're going to make up the rest on our own, but we're going to start some new ancient tribal life. And who's in? That's how it began. And then it carried on. And I mean, the whole thing, that was like the kid with the dream. And I suppose something manifested of itself. So somehow or other, this huge couple of 100 acres playground appeared that we gave a few quid to the Welsh farmers for. And then the dream started to arise after about year 5 or 6 or 7. It was like, wouldn't it be great if we could do it all the time? And then it was like, wouldn't it be great if this was our valley? And then there's no way of buying it. And it would have cost like £500,000 and just, you know, that's just one of those dreams. And then by the time we were in our 12th year, it was like, that's the next step. Now we just buy the land and buy the land so that it become a really wild place. So the wildness of that original gesture became, if you like, it took a while. You know, I'm obviously giving you a short story here, but I don't know how to answer the question. But that just carried on the same thing. Just let's play underneath the waterfalls, and there were waterfalls in this valley. Let's have the wood smoke in the sky. Let's see the tribe, you know, sitting around the fire, cooking the dinner, or at least making chai together. Let's invite Buddhist teachers. Let's invite shamans. I stepped up where I could and decided that storytelling was a way to transmit the ancient wisdom. If we told the stories and we told them and we fed them, we sat around the fire long enough with them, and we started to live this kind of outdoor dream where we were so close to the earth. Yeah, we had teepees and a Bedouin tent, and no plastic tents, by the way, not in this dream. And, you know, if we stayed near enough to the firewood, if we invited people down to do spiritual practice in some kind of, you know, wild forested way, then something would happen. It'd be like a university in the wild or something, though I never used that word, but there would be. And I originally thought, what we'll do, we'll have a collection of teepees and Bedouin tents, beautiful structures, yurts, maybe they came later. And we'll set up here, and then we'll set up there, and then we'll set up here. And wherever we go, it'll be a beautiful kind of encampment where something can happen, until I realized how much work was involved in that. And then it was like, look, it took long enough to get to this valley. Let's just stay here. Let's put the teepee poles up against the tree, and let's come back next summer and do the same. So that's a full 30 years ago there. That's 1990 we're talking about. So that's what I've been doing for 30 years. I did go on several vision quests before that as a young, dreamy kid trying to grow up, and made various prayers to the sky, like, show me what my true work is, because I don't want to do this shit that everyone else is doing. And you got to be careful what you ask for. Yes. So I got more true work than I could possibly imagine, you know, squeezing into a lifetime. And it got to the point where I won't call it a project. What do we say? This dream that keeps like remaking itself. New people appear, new possibilities appear. And now with a little bit of wisdom that comes with old age, and yes, folks, I am old. I can see what the next stage would be, but in order to do it, I'd have to be 22 years old again and do another lifetime. So now it's time to pass on that dream, if you like, to somebody else that might want to move with it, somebody who might want to inherit it. And a whole generation has occurred. So there's been a bunch of kids that grew up with that experience, a bunch of kids that came every summer and sat around the fire, played their drums, played their music. They didn't so much get into the hardcore meditation side of it, but they got into the living in the wild place and wearing big hats and big boots and looking cool. So I don't know if they're going to carry on the dream in some way or other, but that's what I've done. That's how it started. And there's a hint there about how it might end.
Well, that's good. That gives me a resume. I like that first question, because it's sort of just the way that people respond to it. Actually, sort of.
Well, that was a kind of sensible answer. The real answer is I don't know what I do.
Exactly.
Think, you know, life happens, but by itself. If you carefully observe, we can have all sorts of plans and intentions, but what actually happens, as Lennon put it, life is what happens while you're planning something else.
Exactly.
So, you know, I had all kinds of dreams and intentions, but there is something in the world that something that happened there, that I set a course with all the kind of gumption, courage, if you like, there's a sort of boldness in there. There was a kind of boldness that dares to follow nature. But all the other things that happened that made, if you like, something bigger happen, or the flowerings and the other branches and the roots that got all that stuff that happened, it happened by itself. There was something natural happening. Certain people would appear at a certain time, certain teachers would appear, an idea would just happen, and you could almost see that you just create a field, and then somebody would say something, somebody would do something, or someone would appear over the horizon, roll into camp with their drums or their chainsaw or you know, something or other, and just become part of it. And it's like, okay. And a lot of the time I felt as if some of the key people almost stepped out of a fairy tale, and we were down there telling fairy tales. And then you'd say, well, who's coming from the car park now? And it's like, oh, this person's been introduced. Oh, you should meet Shiv, you know, and all of a sudden you've got like another ingredient. Yeah. And those things, like, they can't be managed or micromanaged or anything. I don't know who's coming. It was just my job to take note and see who's coming. Well, he looks pretty cool with his feathers and his hair. What's he up to? Oh, he's actually, you know, a brilliant musician. Take note of this and make sure he gets a, you know, plate of food or a glass of wine, whatever you need. Let's get to know him. Let's see what his place is. And often it would be like that some key people would come. So I always felt like, well, I don't really know what's going on. I don't really know what I'm doing. But then the spirit would move, especially in those early formative years. I would feel like something's happening in this world, but there's something happening in another world. The she or the another more colorful, romantic, spirited, wild version of this world, and you feel a little shiver going through your spine and think, we're doing something right.
Yeah.
And then there were plenty of other times when it's like, what the fuck are we doing here? Yeah. But, you know, plenty of those moments.
Yeah.
Especially when the money runs out, or the car breaks down or something else.
Yes. I know a lot of stories about cars breaking down. I'm going to come back to those points that you've raised, because there's a lot of stuff there, but particularly you're talking about this sort of, it's almost like something's happening in another world, in the other world, as well as what's happening in this one. But yeah, I want to take you back to, you obviously grew up in Ireland somewhere.
No, I obviously didn't. I grew up in inner city Birmingham.
You did? Oh my goodness. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, where we're sitting right now is a couple of yards away from the old stone shack that my grandfather built in 1910, to which I've added various bits and pieces. So I grew up in inner city Birmingham, Irish Catholic parents, gone there looking for work, working in the factories of industrial Britain in the 60s. Yeah, but we went to this place that we all called home. You call it Ireland, but we went home every summer. So the sort of miserable 6 weeks of holidays that they gave us from the prison sentence called school, yes, became like running around the farms of where all my relatives, my mum's people, mostly my dad's people, came from, and going to fetch the cows so I can milk every evening and walk 3 fields down to the end of the farm to the potato field and come back with a sack of potatoes and all that stuff, which I thought was paradise. I just thought, and go to the apple garden because they're going to make an apple cake. So it was a contrast between that with the curlews in the evening and the wagtails around all the puddles, and spending July and August every year doing that. We never thought about going anywhere else. There was nowhere else you ever went to. We didn't have sort of what you might call holidays or something, let's go to the beach or something. My parents wouldn't have dreamed of doing that. Just went home, and then they went back to work, and I went back to school. So it was a kind of black and white world of living in a big industrial town, going to schools that were surrounded by metalworking factories, literally at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, where it had all begun like 200 years before, and then going to other place where nobody even had a car, except one farmer and the priest and the doctor or something, and still be able to glimpse that world where people milked their own cows, made their own butter, and did all that stuff. So those were also seeds. Excuse me. Those are also seeds that maybe formulated something in there. There was a childhood desire to break out. excuse me, a child who desired to break out of town and return in some way or other to that paradise. Now, paradise as a child, having a big green place to play. And our favorite game when we were on our summer holidays would be to make houses, and make a little house under the tree or something like that. And I feel like I never stopped playing house, and I never stopped wanting to sort of get away from the adults, go out into wild nature and make a little house. And it still feels like that now sometimes when we've built all these ginormous Celtic roundhouses at Spearhorse. Now it's, we're no longer in a couple of little teepees. By the way, if anyone's thinking of emulating any of this, don't bother with teepees in Wales. It's an interesting experiment. If you want your life to be really, really hard, go ahead. But I feel we're still playing house, and that there should be that playfulness, even though it can become great art, it can become great architecture, and it can take up creative years of your life. But there's still that instinctual, childlike desire to be out in nature and to make your den, to make your little happy place. Yeah. And then the officials come down with their various clipboards to check what you're doing, which seems a little bit like the boring adults who want to spoil all the fun.
Yeah, yeah. Now
that's fascinates me because question, but there you are. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's good, because what fascinates me about that is, I wouldn't. That's why I said you obviously grew up in Ireland, right? Well, I suppose in a way you sort of did, but it was only just happened to be 2 months of the year.
Yeah, there was a part of the soul that was nourished in Ireland.
But yeah, exactly, because you don't sound like you come from, Birmingham.
Inner city Birmingham.
Exactly. You do not sound like that, and you've never sounded like that.
I've never sounded like that. No, thank you. No, a lot of people try and accuse me as, oh yeah, I can hear it in your accent now.
Well, no, you can't.
So they did send me off to grammar school in Birmingham, where we all learned to say actually at the end of every sentence. Actually.
Oh, okay. But you still got that. There is a sort of an Irish lilt in your voice, actually.
Oh, I grew up in two worlds. So
yeah. Well, yes, and you still are in that.
I'm still quite fascinated too that I can't speak any other languages or tiny smatterings of various places I've traveled in, but I'm still basically just an English speaker. But there are lots of different kinds of English, and I'm very, very interested in the different kinds of English. How the people in the west of Ireland use the language was contrasted with how the people in Birmingham were, and then there were the kind of professors and so forth that taught us at school who use a different kind. And then there's the way that English has become the universal language, shall we say. It's spoken all over the world now, but it's spoken differently in different places. And like it or not, it has become the language of international exchange. And it's also a very beautiful language that can be used in all sorts of ways. And you've been down to Spearhorse yourself, so you know what happens in ritual there. We try to reclaim, not necessarily an archaic, but a more deeply rooted, soulful, heartful way of talking. And you can still use English, but you got to get it away from the Latinization or the kind of bring it back to an English that's closer to the ground, closer to the heart, closer to the bones, closer to the axes that are split in the wood, and bring it to a place where you can talk to spirit and nourish the ground with it, rather than it being a language of power or politics or medical language or technical language or industrial language. So I got interested in language as a kid, because the word that works over there in Galway doesn't work in Birmingham, and I think the whole thing fascinated me. So you have to use that word there and this word over here.
So would you? I know it's probably not the right word, but would you not say that the language is more poetic as you go into? If you go back in time and pre-industrial, people were more poetic about how they described things. I'm thinking about ways that people would name animals. The name of a kestrel in the north of England to what it would be called in the south of England.
Yes.
But there's a much more poetic way of naming something. That's not a case of owning it. It's actually more about the describing of it.
Tolkien wrote an introduction to Beowulf, which is, he was a very interesting man, apart from, now he's famous for the films, but of the amount of words they had in that Anglo-Saxon kind of, going back 1,000 years, the kind of words they had for a man, and now we've got geezer and bloke and guy, they had like thanes and, there's beautiful words that imply this kind of noble warrior-like being that we don't have anymore. It's interesting to look at the roots of words like that. There are not many complimentary words for a man anymore,
No.
and the press for men's got, it's getting worse and worse. Men are just these, useless creatures. There's interesting developments with language, how language goes like that. But I read something many years ago that the linguists had done these tests between the difference between the English working class and the Irish peasants at the time. And of course, they're like the average number of words that you really get used, and in England, it's 2,000, or it was for working class people. And the Irish peasant were using a 5,000 word vocabulary. And of course, language here, even though it was in English, some people spoke Irish, but I only heard words. I only heard Irish when people lose their temper and start shouting about something when I was a kid. But there were turns of phrase, and there was a delight in language and love of language in the west of Ireland. People would always quote each other. If someone said something in a clever way, they'd sort of have these invisible quotation marks, as Paddy Addy said, so forth. And there does seem to be something, if you look at epic poetry, if you go back in time and see the earliest recorded, utterings, whatever, the Homer or wherever you want to go, the Ramayana, even in translation, those ancient cultures produced beautiful language, beautiful metaphors, beautiful expressions, rich and deep. All ancient literature is good. There isn't any kind of nasty little bestsellers that they used to have in ancient, or whatever's come down to us, Gilgamesh, anything from those ancient places, or any of the stuff that gets written down where people have had stories transmitted or poems transmitted orally and are only now just being written down by ethnologists or whatever. It's always beautiful. Beauty in language, beauty in dress, beauty in architecture, beauty in gesture, beauty in ways of being is the natural inheritance of human beings. And our culture, as we can see, has turned the world into an ugly mess. I mean, we're drowning in our own plastic trash. So, which is one of the indicators. You will know them by their fruits. There's something seriously wrong with our culture. And that's one of the things that I became very fascinated by, is not one particular area, just language or story or whatever, but looking at how all those things are connected and end up examining culture. And it was the second summer, I think, at Spearhorse, after camping out like that, where I realized that what were we doing here? What was it? Yes, the wood smoke was the dream, and the meditation under the trees was the dream, and so forth. But after a while, I realized being together, what we were doing was recreating culture. We were starting a new culture. Yes. And that sounds very grand, No, but that's, I think you're right. What it was. There was something wrong somewhere. And there was these little indicators about, let's do something about it. And then I didn't know people were going to be interested in what I was into, but lots of people showed up, and they didn't want to do the hardcore meditation. They didn't want to do the enlightenment intensives. They particularly want to do Tibetan Buddhism, which I was big on and still am. They want to just hang around around the fire and bang their drums and have the kids run around and all mingle together and have a little kind of marriage market and see who fancies who, and just have this big dinners together and light the candles and make beauty and adorn the tables. Or there was a lot of let's just make beautiful things happen here. And then we started, we got into ritual culture, and that gave people a chance to learn to pray or set intentions or just be together in the most beautiful way you could summon up, get everyone to be dressed as beautiful as possible, stand as beautiful as possible, speak as beautiful as possible, and just do something gorgeous and offer it to the universe. So the human beings become kind of a displayers or performers of beauty, and then let the rivers and waters and mountains and all those old pagan gods receive that or be acknowledged through it. And I thought, well, who's going to be interested in that? It turned out that everybody's interested in it. Everybody could do it. They wouldn't want to do it for too long, but kept it short and sweet, they'd be in for it. And then it became a thing where we thought, what if we lived a ritual life for 3, 4, 5, And in the originally, we used to do 10 days at a time where we'd only speak ceremonial language, only have storytelling, only move through ritual. And we developed those rituals like Sacred Man and Sacred Woman, which I think you know very well about yourself.
Yeah.
So those things evolved. But just back to this idea that human beings left alone, left natural, unschooled or reschooled in the wild, started to really beautiful things. It doesn't mean that their ugly problems have disappeared. Now, we're all subject to greed, envy, anger, all those things, fear. They're all still there, but we can still be beautiful. The story can be told. The living of life can be done in a way that's beautiful, not in a way that solves all the problems, not in a way that gets rid of all the neurosis. But beauty in language, you'll find as an inheritance. You won't be able to find an ugly piece of writing or an ugly cradle or an ugly bridle or an ugly shoe come from any culture, anywhere, say 2,000 years ago, no. 3,000. So I mean, anything that's come down to us will be handmade, made extravagantly with loads of beautiful, amazing little patterns and unnecessary things. Even if it's just an arrowhead, you know, you can make an arrowhead with 2 chips. You can take a piece of flint and knock it once or twice, and you'll end up with something razor sharp, sharper than steel, that will go through a deer hide or whatever. But our ancestors never settled for that. They wanted to make it into this classic arrowhead shape, which takes another 200 naps with an antler and a lot of hard work. You know, another hot, well, I suppose not necessarily a long time for them, but a lot of work, a lot of extra work just to make something elegant.
Yes.
And every chip that comes down from the ancient times, people seem to have done that. They didn't just want something that was functional and sharp. They wanted something that was beautiful.
Exactly. I'm going to pick up on a couple of threads on that then. I've done flint napping, so I know how difficult it is. And the fact
everyone should do it in some way. Isn't it a great thing to do? Because you see these things in museums and in the prehistoric, and then when you actually try and make one, you're in touch again with those ancient beings, ancient people.
And the amount of intention, meaning in both ways, your intent to make the arrowhead, but also the intent about what that's for, is all that time that you're doing this, and you're completely absorbed in this business of finding where you're going to nap that bit. Because it's not just because I'll take this bit off here and that bit off there. It's like sometimes you have to turn it around in order to nap this bit to take a bit off.
Yeah, you've got to be right there with it. Flint is such a kind of sharp liquid.
Absolutely.
Anything can happen at any time, isn't it?
And it made
you
me
can break the whole thing. One moment of inattention, you've got a snap thing and you'll start all over again.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, it made me realize as soon as I started doing flint napping, that our ancestors could think in 3 dimensions easily. They could see something on that level and also understand to get that, they'd have to take it from here. You know, how? Because you can't, as a modern person, you can't think like that without going to somewhere else in yourself. Because we used to like, that needs to come off there, and it's obvious. There's your line, and you do it. But as soon as you start dealing with flint, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this kind of ridiculous idea that we were sort of schooled in, that these are primitive people, you know, somehow we've evolved, you know, totally. All of that nonsense.
Absolutely. So obviously my lining from all of this is obviously from music. And for me, looking at traditional music styles, folk music styles, ancient styles of music, you realize that music was something totally different from what we've sort of commoditized it into.
Mm-hmm.
That it was something astonishing that did things in the world. You know, like you were saying, you start to inhabit you're inhabiting the space where you are, and your songs start to influence and talk to your surroundings in all manner of ways, and things start to happen with any form of art.
With all the arts, that's something that we start to experiment with. Just dipping our toes in it. I think we just scratched the surface, but of bringing the arts back into a kind of service in a ritualistic way, so that, and it's not about the artist, look how great I am, look what I did, or take it down to the arts center. That all of the performance is the human part of nature doing its thing. Like, you know, the trees have the leaves and the blossoms and the fruits, and the human beings have their songs and their poems and their stories. And that's how ancient culture looks like. That's what it looks like. But those things have a mutual relationship that I think we've lost, and we don't get it. But you know, when you start to go deeper into these things and wash off some of that white man's paint, and underneath is that desire to be with nature in a deeper way, or to be part of nature, and to remember ourselves as being part of nature. We are, all the white man's culture, the Christian culture, has done a lot of damage because we set ourselves apart from nature as if we're something like not connected to it, which is how we behave now. And it's got us into big trouble. That's how we're wrecking the world. Whereas the ancient view is, you know, the flute player is being taught to play the flute by the same gods that make the leaves grow on the trees. Or the ducks land on the water. It doesn't belong. There's no duck walking around, look what a great duck I am. And there shouldn't be any human beings walking around, what a great human being I am. You know, a little bit of playful ego, that's all right. You know, you're good at something. But everybody knows the real creativity comes from nature.
Yes. There are a lot of instances on the podcast when I interview people, and it comes down to that sort of thing. Well, it's, you know, when you talk to musicians and artists, you often get to this point of, well, it's not really, you know, it's what I do, but it's not really me. I've been either lucky but then you get to this idea that people start to talk about, it's like something is happening to them with the music. You know, they are channeling things. They didn't necessarily write the song. There's a lot of this stuff keeps coming up. And I think there's now more of an awareness again. It's like unshackling yourself from the education system that, you know, you can do this, and this, and suddenly you become, you know, whatever. It's not that at all. It's a case of, well, how can you stand to one side and allow, you know, you're part of the process, obviously. The creative process. But the actual energy of the creative process just passes through you. And that could be the song, or it could be the dance, or it could be whatever, you know.
And this is what you've been around Spirit Horse probably long enough to notice this, but what happens is we create a different field, a kind of a playground, but it's a very serious playground in other ways. We're trying to shake off some of this conditioning, as much of it as possible in some ways, that's put into us in school. Now, we're all educated to be responsible members of a very complex, commercially driven, industrial society. And your gift is like, well, you know, which cog are you in this big machine? You know, what's when you start to live in a kind of a tribal way, even if it's only for a weekend, even if it's only for 10 days or 5 days or something, the invitation at Spirit has always been, well, what does the Spirit want to say through you? You know, and somebody will say something or do something or put on a different costume or paint their face or do some mad thing that is totally beyond what you learn when you learn to stand in straight lines when you're 5 years old and you go through the school system and you come out the other end with a degree. That means your intellect is like poundingly like critical and alive, but the Spirit hasn't learned how to dance, how to be spontaneous, how to be part of nature, how to let the Spirit move through you as a speaker, as a musician, as a maker, as a craftsperson or something. We're the other way around, you know, control, technique, training courses in the old style. For storytelling, definitely, but from drummers, from music, the old understanding was that the gods would give you a gift, whatever you needed to know.
Yes.
It doesn't, and you can't train for it. You can't do a 3-year course or a 2-year course or a 5-year course. You go and make yourself available. You make your prayer, you make your gesture, and you see what happens. The storytelling tradition is quite incredible what they've got in Tibet and Kazakhstan, and maybe they had it everywhere else. There's places I've heard about where the gods or an angel comes to young teenagers, often males, and when they're people who just milking their yaks up on the mountain. They don't read or write, and gives them the story. And then after that, they tell the story. They haven't read it. They haven't heard it. They might have heard a few little bits here and there, but all of a sudden the story has been planted in them by some Dakini or some god or angel that appeared in the trees. And if they don't tell the story, they get sick. Completely
Right. So,
all the way around from, that's more like the indigenous soul, the same way that people learn which healing plants work. The plants come and tell them.
yes.
Not by sticking them all in a test tube, whizzing them around and extracting something from them.
Yeah.
So like the modern world's full of wonders as well, but that indigenous root, that's that native thing, that's in us somewhere or other. And I often give the invitation at Spiros like that. All right, all the stuff that they said, leave outside the school gates, come in here, sit down, stand in a line. The stuff they told you that's not needed inside the school gates, we need that now. Can you please, when the spirit touches you on the shoulder, when it's your turn to be a fool for God or do some wild, crazy thing that doesn't make any sense, if the spirit's telling you to do it, then you must do it. And it's surprising how quickly that it's in us, that's in our spine, or it's in our hormones, or it's in the pituitary glands, or wherever it is, that thing just jumps up, given a chance, given permission, given a welcome, given some sort of address. Like, I'm not even having a bad time for the last 2,500 years, but you're here now, so dance, And it sounds a little bit absurd at first, but I've seen that happen with people,
Yeah,
and that's what
I think that's the trouble.
What makes the tribal life so interesting, that people are wild or living in a more instinctual way.
Yeah. That's the thing, you see. As soon as your one's programming is challenged by, well, what we would, I think, term as natural, it does appear to be absurd, because you've been led to believe something. And again, using music as the sort of metaphor here, the way that, particularly guitar education, because originally it was a case of buy a guitar, learn a couple of chords, and off you go, right? And now, of course, as soon as you got a university course teaching guitar, you've got to be playing loads of songs that have been played by somebody else. Whereas, of course, in the past, if you were working things out on, in my day, working something off the recording, off a vinyl record, you weren't going to get it all right. So you had to sort of bluff and make up bits and things and steal stuff from here and nick an idea off your mate and mess around with it and make it your voice. Find your voice in that stuff. And, I look at the way that the education system has gone with something like teaching the guitar, and it's become absurd and it's lost its power. It's bizarre. And yet technically people can be really good, but it's just...
We get loads of them down in the valley, like people that are technically brilliant guitarists, certainly an awful lot better than me. I'm a sort of two-fingered guitarist, and I love playing guitar, and I've been at it since I was 12, but still, I couldn't play a classical piece, and I never learned to use my little finger, and I never had a guitar lesson. No, I had 2 guitar lessons from this rock guitarist friend of mine, but apart from that, just the same what you're saying, they get 2 chords and just pour out pour out all that trembling fire that's in you when you're a teenager, and I carried on learning to express things. But the technical guitarist have obviously, okay, like we need someone, we're going to sing this sort of holy song all night long, like we do a Sacred Man and Woman or something, or some other ritual. Can you just play like a couple of chords that will back us up? And it's like, no, they can't do it, or they get tired, or they get worn out. Like, well, what's needed here is not your technical brilliance. We just need something really simple that will support this.
Yeah.
And there's an unwillingness to do it, or else there's an inability to do it. And the same with many other things, like people that they might be giving talks at a university or a secondary school or something, and then you ask them to say something, but they're shy about speaking from their hearts. They're okay with lecturing about this subject, which has become a bit of a dead thing to them.
Yeah.
There's something about the reactivating that so that it's from the spirit, of the spirit, for the spirit, and so it feeds something. And the knack of it, it's not about technical brilliance, and it's not about how to. It's more like taking a chance. In some ways, rock and roll did a service to the world, because it's like a lot of very untechnical people playing music, and a lot of brilliant people, of course, showed up. But in theory, if you had your 3 chords and you plug in, you could make a lot of noise about whatever you were feeling. And technical brilliance is wonderful, but what made it was this raw energy. It sort of said we're doing away with that. the orchestras and classical music in the 60s. Who remembers anything that any orchestra did? It's just, I can't get no satisfaction is what we remember,
Exactly.
Just belt it out.
I'm going to pick up on that point because this is important to me. I've got this little non-profit thing that I'm doing called Icaro, and it's basically putting videos into schools, into junior schools, with a few songwriting techniques, cut up primarily, so that kids can just experiment and create something. Nothing's marked, nothing, it's this, look, this is something that so-and-so used to do. It's really crazy. Have a bit of fun with it. And, I think the real creative people started with that type of thing. Now, the interesting thing about cut up is obviously it comes from William S. Burroughs, and of course, interesting guy. So there's a sort of a magical component to this where you can't, it's on the face of it, a ridiculous idea that you can put random things together and create something really poetically beautiful and charged with energy, just randomly. And it really unpicks the logic of, oh, you've got to do this and you've got that and whatever. Yes. And then that then brings, talking about these great musicians in the past, right, to Muddy Waters and people like that. Somebody who could write a song that lasts for 5 minutes on the same riff, that is basically an enchantment to, maybe just the women in the audience, right? Manish Boy, I'm thinking of in particular, which is just one da-da-da-da. That's all it is. Da-da. So you can imagine Muddy Waters turning around to these guys and say, well, this is what I want. And if you were a backup guitarist or whatever, and I mean, he's had a few great players working with him, like Johnny Winter or something. Johnny Winter didn't turn around and say, yeah, but Muddy, I could do this a little bit better.
Complicated.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing that we have to learn, is like you're going back to the thing about the music that you play in Spirit Horse.
It's almost white culture went so technical and so far away from its own heart. We had to relearn how to speak from the heart from those black guys, from those Mississippi people who, and obviously they had been having a hard time and so forth. They had no education, shall we say? They had no money, but they spoke from their heart. And those guys, you can hear it with the Muddy Waters and John Lee Hookers and all the rest of those guys that came before them. Yeah. They don't sound like they wrote a song at all. No. They sound like they got a riff going on the guitar and they just start talking. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't even sound like they're singing. No. And they just basically say, I'm having a hard time. And that's where the blues was kind of born or whatever. But whatever it is, it's straight from the heart. And
totally.
If you try and write a blues song that sounds that spontaneous and simple, it's like you can't fade it, Right. If you don't leave me, I'll find somebody who will. You see, there's the throwaway quality of it, the depth of it, the spontaneity of it. That can't be faked. To write a good blues song is not an easy thing. Those guys are masters, and the ones I like most to sound like they just somehow or other trolled into a recording studio. Somebody put the vinyl thing on, or the wax, whatever, and they started talking. Mm. It's an old and from that came the rock and roll that we've just been talking about. The spontaneous, just not what you say, but how you say it. We had to relearn that.
Yes. So now,
and that was a great gift to the world. That sort of that changed that rocked the world.
Yes, it did. Now this brings me back to something that you said earlier about when things started happening at Spirit Horse, and it's like you made a comment like that there was something about the she, the other world, because again,
fairy world,
because this, and I mean Spirit Horse that's my feeling about that there's a lot of persons in the valley, even when there are no humans in there, if you see what I mean. There's a lot of life going on in the valley. Now, there's obviously, in the tradition of certainly Irish folklore and Cornish folklore and all the rest of it, of artistic inspiration coming from the fair folk or whatever, like you were saying about the Tibetan storytellers.
Yeah, the storytellers of Kazakhstan and Tibet.
Yeah, and that once they've given you a gift like that, it has to be used. However, you have to honor them, otherwise bad things happen, which is exactly the same thing as the idea of the muses with the Greeks.
Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting point because for me, because obviously I don't speak for myself, but there is an honoring of that you have to do. And that's part of how this works. It's like an ecosystem. That something has to be, you're part of the process, but you have to give something back to that. And that might be telling the story. It might be doing the dance or painting that picture and that is the type of thing we need. And none of this is logical. This is the important thing. And you said this earlier as well in another way. You don't know what's going on. You don't know why that happened in the way it did, but something earlier on, you could almost put your finger on it and go, that caused something to set off a series of ripples that made things happen. And I don't know how, and I don't know why. So what would you say, because obviously you've got many, because you're a great storyteller, you've got many tales about how, the in the Irish, Irish tradition, about how music and dance is transmitted. What would your point, what your angle, that's the wrong word, speak about it, basically. I'm saying, what have you?
You have to remember the Irish tradition and Celtic traditions we've only got fragments left. The Vikings burnt most of what was written down, and whatever was oral is lost. So whenever we talk about those traditions, we're only getting fragments of the real thing. Now, there's a lot of fragments in Ireland. There's a bit in the other Celtic countries, and there's lots in Scandinavia to give us an idea of what was happening on the western edge of Europe, or what was going on in Europe, maybe in ancient times. I think some of the Irish stories take us back to what I call the dawn of Europe. There, meaning you've got the original men's lodge there. That's why I tell those stories in the teepee at the men's house at Spearhorse. You got guys running around with dogs chasing deers. And that's been going on for a long, long, long time. So stories that have that as their continual backdrop, you're dealing with ancient stuff, but you're also dealing with it having been filtered down, written down by Christian monks in monasteries in medieval times. Obviously there's quite a bit of filtering going on there, although I think they did a good job, and I think they tried in many ways to honor the originals. But I have never met, I don't think there is one, one of those bardic or druidic or storytellers from ancient times who passed it on to his son or to his apprentice through all those generations and carefully preserved it. If you do want to see something like that or get an idea of what that looks like, you've got to go somewhere else where they still have that. In the heart of the Amazon, or in some Mongolian tribe where there's, where the kids haven't started going to school yet, or you've got to find somewhere where people have still got those things going on. And so the ancient days, the Stone Age, if you like, is still going on in the world in different places. But for us guys now, with our anybody who would like to inquire into these things, let's say, let's start again. Let's make the village happen again. Let's make a new culture, or let's make a new tribe, or let's find a new way of adorning our collective efforts together. And wants to question those things, we'd have to go looking at undisturbed cultures that haven't been wrecked over, that haven't been Christianized or haven't been colonized or whatever. And that's a big old job. So I love to go searching through all the different literatures that I can manage to summon time for. I used to read a lot, I don't anymore. But it's no longer enough to take it from one source. So yeah, you get the little basic, to answer your question, you get those little stories about your man that fell asleep by the river, and then the fairies took him off to their world, taught him these amazing tunes. God is great, but the devil isn't too bad either. and he comes back being able to play this devilish music, and someone else fancies that they can do that, and they go off there with some arrogance on them, and the fairies take away all the gifts that they had. And this is the trick and treat kind of world that's come down to us. Those are only part, I would say, guessing, and also from stuff that I, maybe learned from teachers like Martin Practise is a genius 100 times over on this thing, that of the original relationship that all real, like beautiful, natural, original human cultures had with spirit. Now, not all human cultures are good, but there's been a lot of very beautiful ones where that relationship is nourished. It keeps the people humble, like the drummer or the poet or someone that may have great swagger on them, and they may have some beautiful feathered cloak and have what seems like an incredible arrogance when they're in service to the poem or the drumming or the ritual or the thing, whatever people are doing. But they know that, and everyone else knows that their gifts didn't come from them. They ain't so great. Yes. But they're playing a great part. So you're aware that you're contributing your bit. So that'll be great to have that where people don't feel shy. Like I'm a bit of a shy guy, but when I'm telling a story, I'm in service to the gods of that story, and I'll make sure everybody in the room hears that story. It's the part of the job. Same way that anybody else who's got that ancient flair for creativity may seem like they're like as proud as fuck about what they're doing, but they know that they're using a magic gift and it isn't about them. Yeah. And even if it is about them and they're willing to be a fool for God or something like that, there's a sort of edge to it where you're willing to be in service, and also where that creativity is out of control. It's those wonderful moments where the guitar is playing itself that every musician knows, that all of a sudden it's just happening. You cannot take credit for that, but you're so glad that it happened to you. You do all your practice and all your years and years of labor for those moments when it plays itself. Everyone who plays a guitar knows what that's like. But the same applies to all the other arts, and the same applies to all other creativity, that suddenly you're doing something. I'm big into building, as most people know, but I never like to design a building or, where's your drawing or anything like that. I'll scribble a few things on a scrap piece of paper and then throw it away. Take a few measurements, just check that your imagination might in some way be tallied to reality. But you got to start making something, and you got to kind of love the wood, and each individual. You can't say I need a piece of wood that's going to be 12'6". It needs to be 9 inches wide. If it turns out there's a piece of wood that's not that size, but maybe that wants to go there, and it becomes an individual piece of wood. And well, what if you put that up there? Hold it up there, boys, for a minute. Yeah, that looks good. Just cut the end, and we'll put a finial at the other end, and that's the one that belongs there. When you build like that, every piece of wood is part of the picture. Everything is honored. Nothing gets thrown. Nothing is like an object that's already been pre-labeled. No. Like each, and if you're slicing up trees, then you got to go and talk to the trees. Take the slices. Try and leave the slices of the tree in the same order they came out of the tree, and try and use them at the same time, or all those things to honor things, and then see what happens. And none of my buildings that I've built a lot of things, none of them have ever turned out how I originally thought. There was the seed, and then there was what happened when life starts happening, when the creativity starts happening. And it often meant that a small shed turned into a 2-story building, just because it wanted to. And I don't remember having I'm going to change the plan here. It was just like, hey, this feels good. This and to be able to listen to that. And then with that comes, there's a kind of, well, I call it ecstatic, but it's ecstatic joy that even though you might have caught your finger under a piece of wood, or you might have got scratched on a nail, or you might be tired, or maybe it's time to have a tea break, but that weariness, that exhaustion is a nice feeling, because there's some creative thing driving you. There's something you just want to have it, get it done. It's let's see this thing scrape the sky a little bit. And whereas I've worked on building sites as well, I'm kind of professional in the carpentry sense, but the only thing I trained to do properly. But I've worked on building sites in London and other places in Holland as well. It's just bash it up and 5 o'clock, get to the pub, drink down the sorrow of doing all this boring work, you know, whereas you get to this other side of things that we're talking about, and whether it's making a song or making a ritual or serving, making beauty happen in a building or anywhere else, and it's just a joy to get exhausted making something happen in that way. It has its own natural ecstatic creativity, and when everybody's doing that together, you have the collective communality of all these shoulders rubbing together, and some people are very creative and get a lot done, and some people get damn all done, but still in all, the people moving together is an irresistible buzz. It's almost like it's in us hormonally. It's in the juice of our bodies. It sets a thing. And when the guys are all doing something difficult together, when the guys and the girls are all, you know, creating this kind of anthill of creativity, like sometimes happens at Spear Horse, on, you know, on the good days when we're on a good roll, then there's it feels like this is home. This is natural. This is cool. This is let's just carry on doing this forever.
Because in actual, you know, when you say that, it's like playing in a band when it's going well.
Yeah.
You know, it's that sort of thing that working together with other people makes something even better than you'd originally thought. Now, interestingly, again, back into this idea where, you know, because I encourage people to write songs and stuff like that. And you often get people trying to dictate to somebody else what needs to be done because it's their song, you know. Because in reality, the best thing is, like, I've got this, like you're saying, I've got this sketch on an envelope of this riff, and you give it to the horn players and go, and they go, well, I can't really sort of do that, but because, you know, the trumpets, but we could do this, and it sounds 10 times better than what you came out with. It's that type of thing that it's just like, here's something, here's the sketch, and then it becomes, it's almost that is required, and then it's released into the world and they do their thing and it comes out better.
Yeah.
And I've just found that's always the best way. You know, you say, look, this is the sequence here. The bass player goes, how about does this work? You think, yeah, that works. And the keyboard player throws something in, and that changes what the bass player is doing, and so on. And I've always found that's the best way to work with people. Which again is a bit like
the creativity of rock and roll, wasn't it? Like, we were talking last night here around the fire about the 50s, and how, if you like, white man's culture, the dominant culture of the world, had become so dreary. It's just something had to happen. It was going to be the end of the world. I remember those people think of the wild 60s, but the beginning of the 60s, end of the 50s are a kind of awful time in human history. Wars going on, people being sort of told to put on the uniform and go off and do things, and there was no choice. There wasn't the conscience there is now. You could kind of enlist everybody was the idea, and this you know, get all the new gadgets for like what we all want, the fridges and the toasters and the armies and the factories and progress, and isn't it great? And something had to happen, and one of the first signs that something was going to happen was that music became this spontaneous, you know, creative thing with the Beatles and everybody else. They could, you know, writing amazing songs, 3 per week. So a creativity that I don't think belonged to Lennon and McCartney.
No.
A portal opened, and music that got, in the space of about 5 or 6 or 7 years, became more and more and more spontaneous and out of control. If you compare it to music in the 50s and the 40s, you know what was going on there. And all of a sudden, by the end of the 60s, Hendrix's guitar, like wailing and screaming and roaring, and you know, the notes have become so fluid, and there's no way you could write that stuff down. You know, like write a Jimi Hendrix solo. You know, it doesn't work. It's got to be now, here. You know,
there's a couple of very interesting stories that lock into what you've just said there. I'm just trying to think of the song that sort of epitomized it. It might have been Elvis, actually. But before Elvis appeared on the scene, apparently the #1 hit was "How Much Is That Doggy in the Window?"
Yeah.
And it was almost like
I'm old
that
enough
was
to
the
remember
epitome.
that being on the radio every morning.
That's right. And that, and then suddenly, after that, everything changed very rapidly with Elvis, and you know, obviously there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, but he's the first sort of thing that you start to see appearing in the mainstream. And the other stuff is
the world owes a debt to that you know, deep South black music.
Yeah. And there's another story about a guitarist called Link Wray. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he wrote a song called The Rumble, and it's sort of looked upon as being one of the first rock song. Right? So this guy, it's worth checking out. It's very simple little tune and everything, but it's cited by lots of people, Jimmy Page and all the rest of it, as being the song, and Pete Townsend as being the song that suddenly made them go like, that is, what is this? You know. And Link Wray sort of developed the distorted guitar sound by punching holes in the speaker with a pencil. All right. But apparently the song was created because he was at a hop, you know, a dance, and there was some doo-wop band supposed to be coming on to do their #1 song. I can't remember the name of the band, and they were delayed. So Link Wray's band went on to play, and these guys weren't ready. They hadn't put all their gear on, and they were going to mime anyway. They were going to play it over, you know, play the record over the thing, and they were going to mime. But for some reason, they weren't ready. So they had to play another song, and they didn't have another song. So Link Wray just bashed out, you know, E, D, and A, E, D, and A, and made something up with it. And the drummer came out with his drum riff, and they just played this over and over again. And the audience went bonkers. And it was almost impossible for this other band to follow. And that was the Rumble. And you sort of think like, where did that come from? You know, it's almost like
that thing that the 60s is such an interesting time that four guys playing music could have thousands of young girls screaming at the tops of their voice, almost having like frenzies, hysterics. It was almost as if some male-female thing hadn't happened for so long. Everybody's doing the kind of, you know, getting married or whatever. It's all been contained, and all of a sudden you've got this explosion. It's like, you know, it calmed down after a while, but originally it was this release, almost like a cultural, generational thing that we'd been waiting for hundreds of years for this spontaneous moment to happen. That was kind of wild and sexy, and it was, like, in my view, it was like going back to those original tribal times. Like, we want the ecstasy back in culture. We want to really go nuts and feel God come through us, and rock and roll provided a kind of door for that. And of course, it was greatly feared, the dominant white culture. A lot of this was the devil stuff, you know. This was too good, you know.
Absolutely.
And it became the new holy music. It became the music that launched a whole, what do you call it, next stage of evolution in culture. But now looking back, you can see it all as kind of, the 60s weren't they great? Yeah, a bit of fun, some good bands, but actually a lot of bedrock things changed and shifted. The rock and roll opened the door to it, and of course drugs came along, but the freeing up of sexuality was something that had been hanging around waiting to happen since, I don't know, the 13th century or something. That was a long overdue, and people forget that. You know, I had mates that lived through those days, the early 60s. You couldn't rent a flat with your girlfriend in the 60s. You had to show the landlady your marriage certificate. You know, no one would dream of that now. You know, there were some long-lasting effects, as well as, of course, the euphoric possibility, which was a real thing, didn't take root, but it never went away completely. It can't, or you know, this kind of human presence on the planet just isn't going to work out. There's still an awful lot more things that have to happen. We're ready for another one of those, wherever it is.
Yes. And actually, Shiv, I think that is a perfect note to finish on, actually.
Wow, very good.
Because that conversation almost went around in a circle, which was nice. So I'll put details up in the show notes about Spirit Horse if people want to connect with you. I mean, is there anything else you want to mention before we?
Okay, so if you like this conversation and you'd like to put on the muddy boots and live it, or explore the the many other branches and flowers of this whole thing and what we could do together. There is this place which now seems to have appeared in a wild valley in Wales called Spirit Horse, and you could look it up on spirithorse.co.uk, and there's various ways of coming to join us for a weekend or a week or a month. There's various little programs that we run and so forth, and you'll be very welcome if you want to learn to dance the old way.
That's wonderful, and I can thoroughly recommend it.
Okay, man. Well, thanks for the chat.
It's been great fun. It's good to see you again after all this.
Shouldn't get talking about guitars and rock and roll. That one just goes on to, but there you are.
Yeah, it's good. Great stuff. Anyway, so all the best, and obviously we're recording this absolutely at the tail end of 2020. So let's see what next year we'll bring, eh? See you then. Cheers.
Bye.
Yes, thanks to Shivam, and check out his work with Spirit Horse. The address is in the show notes. Shiv's a great orator and storyteller, and he talks about sort of magical language, and it's amazing. He's got a very enchanting voice, and what they've managed to achieve at Spirit Horse is amazing, really incredible. Anyway, so till next time, we'll see you then. Bye.